Okay, so let's move to Keats. Because Keats, as I mentioned in the comments, when he wrote on first looking into Chapman's Homer, he was actually training to be a surgeon. When he published the great sonnets, which include Ode on a Grecian Urn and the later odes, he was a licensed apothecary. The guy who gives you like folk remedies for runny nose or fever or something. When in our time, the term surgeon sounds prestigious, but it wasn't a prestigious calling at all. It was very much a lower class, not lower class, but it was a working class occupation. It wasn't a prestigious occupation to be a surgeon. And actually, when Keats began publishing these poems, he was largely an autodidact like Blake, meaning that he taught himself how to write poetry. He didn't go to any prestigious school. Unlike Shelley and Byron, who went to Cambridge, as I mentioned, as well as Wordsworth and Coleridge also went to Cambridge. So he wasn't prestigious. He didn't have a prestigious education at all. So he taught himself how to write poetry. He taught himself the Western literary tradition, or at least the English literary tradition, by reading widely on his own while he was training to become a surgeon. If Wordsworth got inspired by nature, and Coleridge was inspired by the subconscious, by dreams, by opium-induced visions, hallucinations. Oh yeah, by opium-induced hallucinations. And while Blake was inspired by spiritual visions and also the social problems that were going on around him, Keats was very much inspired by literature, by his readings of literature. Because again, unlike Shelley and Byron, he didn't have that much mobility. This guy basically spent his time reading, and that was how he got inspired. Even the Nightingale, Ode on the Nightingale, the poet John Clare, who shared the same publisher as Keats, the poet John Clare said, John Clare is a contemporary of these guys, and he's famous for writing nature poems. He was an environmentalist. He campaigned for ecological rights, for animal rights. So he was kind of the ecological warrior of his day. He shared a publisher with Keats, and he said that the problem with Keats is that when he talks about a nightingale, he doesn't talk about an actual literal nightingale. The nightingale is always something else. It's a symbol. It's not the literal thing. And that's an important consideration when we read the poetry of Keats. This is a guy who doesn't have much actual interaction, or who has a very limited experience with the so-called real world, the real life. He was confined to solitude a lot of the time. He was immersed in his studies and his forays into literature and other artistic forms are what inspired inspired his poetry. So his language is always dense with allusion. And to like the key to his poetry is to kind of tease out his artistic references. So many of these poems were written in 1819 and then published in 1820. These are part of his his so-called great odes, Ode to a Nightingale, Ode to a Grecian Urn, and Ode to Autumn. So when Keats wrote these odes, he knew that he was gonna die because he had been diagnosed from a young age with tuberculosis, and he spent a lot of his time in bed battling consumption. And in the last year of his life, actually, he had to leave England because he was told that he wouldn't survive another winter in England. Of course, he still died the following year, the year after these poems were published. So these poems were published in late 1820 and then died. Keats already died a few months later in 1821. So the concerns of Ode to a Nightingale, Ode to Autumn, and Ode to a Grecian Urn, many of these poems deal with the theme of timelessness, of using art to freeze time and to like preserve that idealized moment where you don't have to be so concerned with mortality. when we read those poems by Keats, we can also think about his mind space of that time. Like this guy was dying when he wrote these poems. So Ode to a Nightingale. One context for Ode to a Nightingale is the figure of the nightingale as a symbol in the English literary tradition. Um, if you remember, or as I mentioned earlier, the later Romantics were very much inspired by Greek classical literature and mythology. So one of the myths that inspired Ode to a Nightingale is the myth of Philomela and Procne. The myth goes, let me tell you the story. So Procne and Philomela are sisters, and then Procne was married to this guy named Tereus, and they moved to a different Greek town. I forgot the name. I think it was Thrace in Greece, and Philomela lived in another Greek town. So Procne was missing her sister, so she asked her husband to come bring her sister to Thrace so that they can, bond and spend time together. So Tereus goes to the town where Philomela was living and escorts her to Thrace. But in the course of their journey, Tereus gets very attracted to Philomela. So, and of course, Philomela was like, "No, yuck, you're my sister's husband. Why would I get it on with you?" So Tereus rapes Philomela, and then he tells her, "You can't say anything about this." Philomela, being the feisty woman that she is, says, "No, I will tell my sister. You will be punished, etc., etc." So what Tereus does is he cuts off her tongue so that she can't speak. So it's a bloody tale. So he cuts off her tongue and then brings her to Thrace. And then the sister, Procne, of course, was like horrified that Philomela's tongue was cut out, and so Philomela couldn't communicate. What Philomela does is she does tapestry, and then in the tapestry, which is a very feminized art form, in the tapestry she kind of tells the story of how she was raped. So the sister Procne, of course, got so angry at what happened, so she and Philomela plotted revenge against Tereus by killing Procne and Tereus's son, Etis, or Etos in some myths. So Procne kills her own son with Tereus, and then she serves so they kill the son, they cut up the body, they cook it and serve it to Tereus as stew. So they make Tereus a cannibal by eating his own son. And then after Tereus is finished with his meal and he's like, "Oh, this is so delicious, la la la." Procne and Philomela serve him the severed head of the son. So Tereus realizes that, "Oh my God, I ate my own son," and he's so angry that he tries to kill the two sisters, but they escape because the gods turned them into birds. So Philomela was turned into a nightingale, and Procne was turned into a swallow. And so in the English literary tradition, the nightingale has a very melancholy connotation. This is a bird who cannot sing. The female nightingale supposedly cannot sing. If you hear a nightingale singing, it's usually the male one. Supposedly, I'm not an animal expert. So the nightingale has this melancholy connotation for the English literary tradition, and John Keats takes that idea and runs with it with this poem of melancholy. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed, and the leafwards had sunk. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thy happiness, that thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beech and green, and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. So in the first stanza, he is addressing the nightingale, and he's not complaining, but he's speaking about how much his heart aches and he feels drowsy. But because he hears this nightingale who might be flying outside his window, sitting outside his window, he begins to envy the nightingale, who is too happy in thine happiness. You are a light-winged dryad of the trees in some melodious plot of beech and green, and shadows numberless. So the nightingale is unburdened by the sort of burdens that are burdening Keats. The nightingale, unlike Keats, is able to sing of summer in full-throated ease, and it seems that he expresses some kind of envy for this. In the next stanza, he writes, "Oh, for a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and the country green, dance and Provençal song, and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of warm south, full of the true blushful Hippocrene, with beads bubbling, winking at the brim, and purple stained mouth." Hippocrene is a fountain in Mount Helios, supposedly, and supposedly, as the myth goes, if you drink from this fountain, you will find literary inspiration. So when he begins by speaking about this draft of vintage, which is wine. So, oh, he's saying, I wish I had wine right now, um, uh, a wine that tastes like warm south. I guess he's referring to how wines are usually grown in Italy or France. And of course, he can't really travel because he's stuck in England. So he's wishing that he had this taste of wine, which he likens to the fountain of Hippocrene, which is supposed to give him some kind of artistic inspiration. He continues that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade into the forest dim. So if I could drink this wine and find inspiration, then I could just leave this world without anyone noticing. And could, metaphorically, I guess, I could fly with you, Nightingale, and we can just sing. We can just revel in our artistry. In the next stanza, he says, "Fade far away, dissolve and quite forget what thou among the leaves hast never known, the weariness, the fever, and the fret. Here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last gray hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and lead an eye despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but on the viewless wings of poesy, though the dull brain perplexes and retards. Already with thee, tender is the night, and haply the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry face. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown, through the verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. So here he celebrates, he tells the nightingale, fade far away, dissolve and quite forget what thou amongst the leaves hast never known. So this weariness with life, this weariness with mortality and everything, all the burdens that come with being alive, he's telling the nightingale, fly away from all of this. But the implication is also that I wish I could fly away with you and leave all of this here. And I will fly with you, not targeted by Bacchus and his parts, not by simply drinking wine or being addicted to this, as he seemed to indicate in the previous stanza. So instead of flying away, getting high by drinking wine or some other substance, I will fly with you through the wings of poesy. Through art, I can escape this mortal coil, at least for a moment. I can escape this burden and this weariness with this world, and I can fly with you. He says this to the nightingale. In the next stanza, he writes, I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in the embalmed darkness guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows. The grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child. The coming musk rose full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. So he's just describing the beautiful flowers, things upon his feet, the grass, the thicket, the fruit tree wild. Makes me think of a grounding exercise when you're trying to describe the things that are around you. Like if you're anxious and you feel like listless and restless, one grounding exercise is to simply describe the things around you. Like, oh, this is a Logitech Pebble mouse. Oh, this is a table. This is a screen. Or so he's like doing that, but with the plants around him. but he kind of negates, not negates, but he doesn't see them. Of course he can see them because he's able to list it for us, but he says I cannot see. So there is an indication of I'm starting to leave this consciousness of the earthly plane. As the sky grows darker, darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to seize upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sod. A sod is a surface of soil where grass is growing. So he's saying, I've been half in love with easeful death, which seems to be a reference to suicide ideation. He says, now more than ever seems it rich to die, to seize upon the midnight with no pain. Like it would be beautiful to die now while you are singing there, bird, while you're singing there, nightingale, in such an ecstasy. You can continue singing and I will become soil. I will die and become soil. Saying something like this. And he continues in this vein of like melancholy thinking, thou was not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth when sick for home. She stood in tears amid the alien corn, the same that ofttimes hath charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. Like in the previous poem, but in the Ozymandias, where he celebrates the power of the art and the artist, Keats seemed to say the same, that this bird is immortal because its song will be heard by people from the past, from and in the future. Of course, he's not referring to the literal bird that he might have seen, but to the idea of the nightingale, the transcendent idea of the nightingale and the nightingale song, which will be heard as long as the species exists. So because the song continues on, then the bird will not really die. And then he continues, forlorn the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my soul's self. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she's famed to do, the seething elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now 'tis buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music? Do I wake or sleep? So he is jolted from his reverie, and then he asks, when he is jolted from the reverie because he could no longer hear the nightingale song, he asks, fled is that music? Do I wake or do I sleep? So the moment that you no longer have that experience of art, which he personifies the nightingale as somebody producing a song, producing art, once he is no longer inspired by that music, by that art, and he asks, do I wake or do I sleep? Have I been awakened from this artistic reverie, or is it that I sleep now? And again, sleep here is associated with lesser forms of consciousness. You're not awake to something. You are numb. You are resting. You are not awake. Hindi bukas ang iyong mga mata. You are, yeah, it's like a lesser form of living consciousness, that when I am no longer in touch with nature, with art, with artistic inspiration, then it's like I'm asleep again. I'm asleep again. I'm like catatonic again. And that's something that characterizes a lot of Keats' poetry, about how he attributes aliveness, sensibility, the feeling, the sense of being actually here, of being alive, when he is touched by art and by poetry. Concurrent with his writing of poems, Keats also wrote extensively in his diary about his poetics. Like, why does he compose the things that he does? What is his poetic method, his artistic method? And I think those of you who are in creative writing will also be required to write something like that. You're required to produce an artistic work and then to also simultaneously produce criticism about it. One concept that Keats is known for is the idea of negative capability. And he wrote about this concept in one of his journals. And he defines this as the writer's ability to accept uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after facts and reason. So, if we're speaking about recurrent themes that are expressed in the works of many romantics. This is one of them also. This privileging of emotion and feeling and sensation, and the privileging of the feels, so to speak, of affect. That feeling that you cannot put a word to, that you cannot rationally explain. It's just something that you feel. This privileging of that sensation is something that characterizes again many of the works by the Romantics. So recall, for example, even Wordsworth's own work on how it's the feeling and the recollection of childhood which you do not have a literal memory of, how this feeling the feeling of the sublime that you get from nature, how these are what inspire poetic inspiration. Or Coleridge, who privileges inspiration from an altered state of consciousness, be it through the imbibement of substances or through dreaming. So these are this seeming hierarchy of feeling over reason, is something that is characteristic of this period, and is also seen as a reaction to the previous periods, the Enlightenment periods, privileging of reason, the idea of I think, therefore I am. And the Romantics are like, that's not what humanity is all about. Feeling is also important. So the idea of negative capability is that as a writer, you can write well if you do not have to make sense. Like, it's not about making sense of everything in a rational way. If you're able to hold together uncertainties, doubts, and mysteries, if you're able to deal with paradoxes without trying to make sense of them using the empirical rational mind, then you can create poetry. And I think one of the difficulties of reading poetry for people who are not accustomed to reading poetry, which includes me. I prefer fiction myself because it's easier to comprehend, I think, for me. But poetry has its own internal logic. Uh, to understand poetry, one poet, I forget who, describes it as entering a dark room and it's a dark room, there's no light, and you're trying to feel around the walls looking for the light switch. So imagine that a poem is a room where everything is dark and you don't really understand what's going on, but you use your various senses, your sense of touch, your sense of hearing, your sense of smell, in order to figure out where things are, what the shape of the room looks like, what objects are contained within it, what's in there, and how do you navigate this structure, even without really knowing where you are going, even when you are kind of blind. So you feel your way around the poem, and then at some point you find the light switch and the things make sense. So in reading poetry, especially romantic poetry, especially the later romantics, we may not always understand what they are saying literally, rationally, but you try to feel the sensations that the images of the poem evoke. And from these sensations, we kind of get a sense of what the poet is saying. The language of sense making and sensibility, I just included autumn because of how much it evokes the various senses. When he describes the season of mists and fellow fruitfulness, he evokes smell, touch, sight, temperature, etc. So another reason is because of what the season of autumn symbolizes, especially for Keats, who is gonna die in the following spring. So usually spring is seen as the moment of birth, of new beginnings, of new hope. And autumn is a time of harvest where you reap what you have sowed, where you are able to get bounty if you worked for it before in earlier seasons. Uh, but here, the celebration of autumn is tinged with melancholy because of how it seems to portend a kind of ending. In the last stanza, for example, Keats writes, "Where are the songs of spring? Eh, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too, while barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. Then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn, among the river sallows borne aloft, are sinking as the light wind lives or dies, and full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. Hedge crickets sing, and now with treble soft, the red breast whistles from a garden croft." The red breast whistles could be a red-breasted swallow or a kind of bird. And gathering swallows twitter in the skies. It's melancholy ending of the birds. The most famous poem by Keats, I will breeze through this. The most famous poem by Keats is Ode on a Grecian Urn, and it's usually cited as a prime example of ekphrasis, which uses visual art in order to write a literary description. So, Ode on a Grecian Urn is concerned with time and the timelessness of art vis-a-vis the fleetingness of mortality and actual living, the contradictions between that which endures but does not change, and that which is dynamic and full of life but which is bound to end. I'll just maybe highlight one particular stanza in Ode on a Grecian Urn. Here. The So I'll just read these two stanzas. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, these soft pipes play on. And he's referring to the piper that is pictured in the urn. Not to the sensual ear, but more endeared. Pipe to the spirit, ditties of no tone. So imagine that the piper is playing songs not to the sensual ear, not to the literal ear, but to the imaginative one. I, who am looking at this urn, can imagine the piper playing the music for me. And this he describes as more endeared, more precious, more valuable. This ability to imagine a sensation that is not actually occurring. So, this focus on the imaginative mind as a way to appreciate art is referred to in these stanzas. So play on not to the sensual ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. Yet do not grieve, she cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss, forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves nor ever bid the spring adieu, and happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion far above that leaves a heart's high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. So he's describing here like that contrast between the happy love supposedly of lovers who can never consummate their love because they're stuck on this urn in this situation of habulin mo ako, yung naghahabulan, like that this classic Pinoy image of lovers chasing each other around the tree. I don't know if you still see films like that, but the lovers in the urn are caught in this forever exciting chase, and they're rendered immortal there. And he says that's better than the actual experience of love, where I'm always left dissatisfied and like that always leaves my heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. If you want to bring in more biographical criticism in this, Fanny Braun famously refused to consummate her love with Keats. So these two people Fanny Brown was living literally next door to Keats, and Keats had a huge crush on her, and she supposedly reciprocated. They wrote a lot of letters to one another, but their love was never consummated, like physically. And Keats was wrote a lot about that in his diaries. Like, he was so sad, and some critics would say that Fanny's refusal to consummate their love is something that contributed to the deterioration of his health, or something like that. So this theme of preservation, the preservation of situation in art, and also not knowing what actually happens. Because as an artist looking at the artwork is not final. It is open to interpretation, and the artist is able to imagine situations that arises from what is expressed in the art. So when he asks, who are these coming to the sacrifice? You can think of, he's turned the urn maybe, and on, or he's gone around the urn, and on the other side there's a different picture, not the lovers but these people coming to a sacrifice, and he doesn't know what it is for, but he as a viewer enjoys thinking about what could this be about, and then he writes a story about what it could be about. And here the artwork serves as an inspiration for the creation of another artwork. And it doesn't matter what actually historically happened for Keats, at least, and in the context of this poem at least. He says in the last two lines, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. Like, I don't need to know what is the historical context of this urn, what is the context of its production. All I know is that I'm inspired by how beautiful it is. And the truthfulness, the truthiness of that inspiration is what matters to me now. Okay, I'm over time, so I will stop talking about Keats. Okay, I'm concluding the class. Unless any of you have questions, feel free to linger. Bye bye.